Audrey Wilson spent her life in the shadows, straight a daughter, tireless worker, the selfish one compared to her golden child sister, Vanessa. For years, she carried the burden in silence, even paying her sister's rent, while her father praised Vanessa's carefree charm and dismissed Audrey's sacrifice. But silence has a breaking point. At a glittering country club dinner, one word, selfish, ignites a reckoning that shatters decades of favoritism. Secrets spill, masks crack, and the family's polished image crumbles. What follows is fallout, confrontation, and the fragile chance of rebirth. This is not the story of the sister who stayed quiet. It's the story of the woman who finally claimed her truth. My name is Audrey Wilson. I'm 32 now, but for most of my life I've been cast in a role I never auditioned for. The serious one, the selfish one, the daughter who always seemed to pale next to her younger sister Vanessa. If you've ever been the responsible sibling who works twice as hard only to get half the recognition, then you'll probably understand what I'm about to share. I grew up in Oak Brook, a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside Chicago. It's the kind of place where appearances matter, freshly cut lawns, families competing to get their kids into the best schools, and the country club at the center of it all. That was where my father, Harold, liked to shine. He was successful, charismatic, and loved being seen as the doting family man. But behind closed doors, that image wasn't the whole truth. From the beginning, my sister Vanessa was the star. My dad often said she had a spark that made people gravitate toward her. She could walk into a room of strangers and leave with 10 new friends. At neighborhood barbecues, I'd watch him beam with pride as he told stories about her charm. Vanessa's never met a stranger in her life. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, standing on the sidelines with my report cards full of straight A's, hoping he'd notice me too. My mom, Diana, tried to make things even. She would slip into my room after one of those nights and whisper, "Your father loves you, Audrey. He just shows it differently." But even as a child, I could sense what she really meant. He showed it less, much less. The favoritism only became sharper as we grew older. When I made the honor roll year after year, it barely earned a distracted, "Good job." But when Vanessa landed a minor role in the school play, Dad brought her flowers and took us all out to a downtown restaurant. "Your sister has star quality," he said, as though academic success was automatic for me and therefore unworthy of praise. What he didn't see was the late nights I spent at my desk, fighting exhaustion to keep those grades up. Nothing about it came easy. By the time I was 16, our family had fractured. My parents divorced, and while I held myself together, balancing AP classes with a part-time job, Vanessa became Dad's emotional support. She was only 13 at the time, but he leaned on her, indulged her, and excused her when she faltered. I, on the other hand, was expected to be self-sufficient, the strong one who didn't need comforting. College magnified the contrast. I worked 30 hours a week at a coffee shop while grinding through Northwestern's marketing program. I carried student loans, but I carried pride too, because I knew I was building something real. Vanessa, meanwhile, bounced from one college to another, dropping out each time. Yet Dad always opened his wallet, tuition, apartments, even a car. His reasoning was that she was delicate and needed the support. I apparently needed nothing. Fast forward a decade, and the pattern hadn't changed. I built a career through 80-hour work weeks, climbing from intern to executive by the time I was 30. Vanessa was still drifting, cycling through short-lived jobs and longer boyfriends. And Dad still saw her as the golden child while I was, the cold, selfish one? The daughter who didn't know how to enjoy life? I wish I could say I ignored the labels, that I was strong enough to brush them off. But the truth is, they cut deep. Every time Dad praised Vanessa for being carefree, it felt like he was condemning me for being responsible. Every time he called me too focused on work, it felt like a punishment for refusing to lean on him the way she did. For years, I swallowed it all. I told myself keeping the peace was more important than speaking up, but that silence came with a cost, financially, emotionally, spiritually. And one night, at a country club dinner, surrounded by crystal glasses and polite laughter, the cost became too high. Because that was the night my father looked across the table, compared me to my sister, and called me selfish in front of his friends. And that was the night something inside me finally broke. College was supposed to be the great equalizer. the place where hard work and determination would finally speak louder than charm. At least that's what I told myself as I packed my bags for Northwestern University, a dream school that I had fought tooth and nail to afford. I had saved every dollar from babysitting gigs, summer jobs, and my after-school shifts at the local diner. Even with scholarships, it wasn't enough. So I signed my name to student loans that would hang over my 20s like a shadow. At the same time, I picked up 30 hours a week at a coffee shop near campus. Most nights I closed the store at midnight, then dragged myself home to study until my eyes blurred. Sleep was a luxury, but grades weren't optional. I wasn't naturally brilliant. I survived on sheer grit. Meanwhile, Vanessa's college journey couldn't have looked more different. She started at one university, then decided the vibe wasn't right. Dad wrote the checks for her tuition, her trendy off-campus apartment, and even the down payment on a brand new car. When she dropped out, he funded her transfer to another school, and then another, like hitting reset on a video game. Each time, the story was the same. College just isn't for everyone. Vanessa is creative. She's still finding her path. What Dad didn't say out loud, but what his actions screamed, was that Vanessa's stumbles were excusable, even charming, while my effort was invisible. The contrast gnawed at me. I remember one Thanksgiving, my junior year. I came home exhausted but proud. I had just aced a brutal marketing analytics midterm after pulling 3 consecutive all-nighters. At dinner, Dad asked Vanessa how her semester was going. She had already dropped out of her second college by then, but instead of confronting her, he smiled indulgently as she chattered about the new yoga studio she was thinking of training at. When he finally turned to me, his only comment was, "You work too hard, Audra. Life isn't just about books." Books? I wanted to scream. I wasn't coasting through novels in a library. I was killing myself balancing work and school so I wouldn't drown in debt. But what was the point of explaining? He had already decided my seriousness was a flaw, not a strength. By the time I graduated, 3.8 GPA, marketing degree, job offers lined up, Vanessa had cycled through 3 majors, 2 colleges, and 1 dramatic breakup that somehow landed her back at Dad's house. And yet, when extended family asked how we were doing, Dad would beam proudly and say, "Vanessa is still exploring her options. Audrey's busy with work." Busy with work. That was his label for me. Not ambitious, not successful, just busy. My first job out of college was at a mid-sized marketing firm in Chicago. Entry-level, demanding, but an opportunity I knew I had to seize. I poured myself into it. Long hours, late nights, endless client pitches. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Within 2 years, I was promoted. By 30, I had clawed my way up to executive level, an achievement that came with both pride and exhaustion. And Vanessa, she was drifting. A receptionist for 3 months. A retail associate for 5. A yoga instructor until she got bored of early mornings. A personal assistant until her boss didn't get her vibe. She jumped from one boyfriend's apartment to another, always cushioned by Dad's generosity when things inevitably collapsed. I didn't begrudge her the help, at least not at first, but I couldn't ignore the double standard. When I asked for help covering a textbook my freshman year, Dad told me it would build character to figure it out myself. When Vanessa asked for help paying off a credit card maxed out on clothes, Dad paid the bill without hesitation. I began to understand something crucial. In my father's eyes, independence wasn't a strength. It was an excuse to neglect me, and dependency wasn't a weakness. It was Vanessa's ticket to endless support. That realization hardened me. If no one was going to notice my sacrifices, then I would notice them myself. Every raise, every promotion, every dollar I saved, it was proof that I could survive without anyone's help. Proof that I was more than just the selfish one. But even as my career thrived, resentment grew. Because what Dad and Vanessa didn't know was that eventually, despite all my boundaries and pride, I would become the one keeping her afloat. Not Dad, not her boyfriends, not Brenda. Me. And that secret, unacknowledged burden would become the fault line that eventually split our family wide open. It started, as these things often do, with a midnight phone call. I was half asleep when my phone buzzed at 11:30 p.m. Vanessa's name lit up the screen. I debated letting it go to voicemail. Her late-night calls were rarely about anything good, but something in me still couldn't ignore her. When I answered, she was sobbing, Tyler kicked me out, she wailed, referring to her latest boyfriend. The rent's due in 3 days, and I have nowhere to go. Dad says I can't move back in with him and Brenda. They turned a spare room into a home gym. Please, Audra, I don't know what to do. I sat there in silence, torn. My apartment was barely big enough for me, let alone a second person with piles of belongings and a flair for drama. But more than that, I knew from experience that living with Vanessa was a tornado waiting to happen. She was chaos in human form. I can't take you in, I said finally. But I can help you find a place. How much can you afford for rent? Her answer, of course, was almost nothing. Working part-time at a boutique shop, she barely covered food and Ubers. Saving for emergencies had never crossed her mind. Against my better judgment and against Derek's cautious advice, I agreed to help her secure a studio apartment in Wicker Park. The rent was $1, $200 a month. Reasonable by Chicago standards, but wildly out of Vanessa's league. I'll cover the first 3 months, I told her firmly. That gives you time to find a better job and get on your feet. She gushed with gratitude, swearing up and down that she'd update her resume, apply to full-time positions, and finally take her career seriously. I even pulled strings with a few professional contacts, trying to set her up with interviews. For a moment, I let myself believe this was an investment in her future, not just a bailout. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Each month I transferred $1, $200 directly to her landlord, watching my own financial goals slip further away. The condo down payment I'd been saving stagnated. The master's program I dreamed of pursuing stayed on hold. Even the simple trip Derek and I had planned, just a weekend in Wisconsin, was indefinitely postponed. Meanwhile, Vanessa's Instagram told a different story. Weekend getaways to wineries in Michigan, new designer clothes, tags still visible in mirror selfies. Dinners at restaurants where an appetizer cost more than my weekly grocery bill. Every time I confronted her, she had an excuse. The trip was mostly paid for by a friend. The clothes were on sale. The dinner was just one special night, and every time I reminded her of our original agreement, she pleaded for just 1 more month. I promise, I'll figure it out. 1 more month became her mantra, and I let it continue, even as resentment grew like rust in my chest. Because deep down, I wasn't just paying Vanessa's rent. I was paying for peace, for the illusion of family harmony, for the hope that maybe, finally, my father would see the sacrifices I made and stop calling me selfish. But of course he didn't know. No one did. Vanessa swore me to secrecy, insisting she was too embarrassed for Dad to know how much she was struggling. In reality, she wasn't struggling at all. She was living a life propped up by me while everyone else admired her carefree spirit. The irony was suffocating. At family gatherings, Dad would beam at Vanessa. She may not make much money, but she knows how to live in the moment. Then he turned to me with a sigh. You work too much, Audra. You're missing out on life. I wanted to scream. Missing out? I was missing out because my salary was split between my own bills and Vanessa's rent. Because my dreams were indefinitely postponed while she sipped cocktails in Miami. Derek, my boyfriend, saw it clearly. He watched me recalculate budgets every month, watched me say no to dinners out, vacations, even new shoes, because Vanessa's rent is due. One night, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not helping her, Audrey. You're enabling her. You're punishing yourself so she can stay stuck." I hated that he was right. But years of family conditioning made it almost impossible to imagine cutting her off. What would Dad say? What drama would follow? Would I be the villain who let her sister become homeless? So I stayed silent. I kept paying. And with each passing month, the bitterness deepened, eroding whatever fragile self-worth I had left. Looking back now, I realized that was the beginning of the fault line. Because no matter how hard I tried to hide it, resentment has a way of seeping out. And one night, at the country club dinner where Dad would once again compare me to Vanessa, that hidden fault line would finally rupture. The Oak Brook Country Club had always been my father's stage. Every June, without fail, he would book a private dining room, gather family and a few close friends, and play the role of patriarch, successful, generous, admired. For everyone else, it was just dinner. For me, it was a performance where I was always the background character and Vanessa was the star. This year, I dreaded it more than ever. 2 years of quietly paying her rent had left me drained, both financially and emotionally. And yet, when the invitation came, I didn't decline. Maybe some part of me still hoped for acknowledgement. Or maybe I just didn't want to give my father another excuse to call me selfish. The dining room was immaculate, white linens and crystal glasses gleaming under chandeliers. Dad and Brenda were already there, smiling with their friends, the Porters and the Hayes, longtime family acquaintances, who knew our family history only in its glossy country club version. Vanessa swept in fashionably late, a Louis Vuitton handbag swinging from her arm. My stomach sank instantly. That bag was worth at least $2,000, suspiciously close to the business opportunity she had begged $300 for just days before. As I took my seat, I forced a polite smile, but my chest was tight. I sipped wine to steady my nerves, listening to Vanessa charm Mrs. Porter with stories about an upcoming girls' trip to Miami. So that was where my money had gone. "Audra, you're so quiet tonight," Dad observed during the main course. "Everything all right at work?" "Work is fine," I said evenly. "Just processing some information." "You work too much," he replied with a dismissive wave. "All those hours. And for what? You should enjoy life more. Learn from your sister. She doesn't make much, but she knows how to live." The words stung more than they should have. How could he not see? The only reason Vanessa lived so freely was because I was quietly footing the bill. Brenda jumped in, smiling at Vanessa. "Tell everyone about the new yoga studio you discovered." As Vanessa launched into an animated description, I stared at my water glass, heat rising in my chest. Every approving nod she got from Dad, every indulgent chuckle from his friends, every subtle dismissal of my life, it all pressed on me like a weight I could no longer carry. Then dessert menus arrived, and with them, the comment that snapped the last thread of my composure. "I'm thinking of taking a pottery class this summer," Vanessa announced. "It's expensive, but it would be so fulfilling." "Worth every penny," Brenda chimed in. Dad beamed. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. It's good to explore your passions." Then he turned to me, frowning. "Audra, you should really take notes from your sister. You're so defensive all the time. Selfish, really. Not like Vanessa." The word echoed in my head, selfish. The same word I had heard since childhood. The same label that justified every slight, every dismissal, every forgotten achievement. And here I was, 2 years into silently subsidizing Vanessa's lifestyle, being called selfish in front of a room full of people. Something inside me broke. I set my napkin down deliberately and looked straight at my father. "Dad, when was the last time you paid Vanessa's rent?" The table went silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Dad blinked, caught off guard. "Well, I helped her with the deposit when she first moved in." "Why?" "Because for the last 2 years," I said, my voice calm but cutting, "I've been paying it. $1, $400, every single month. That's why I can't take vacations, why I put grad school on hold, why I live like a workaholic while Vanessa plays the free spirit. Because I've been covering her bills while you call me selfish." Vanessa's face drained of color. "Audra, don't..." I didn't let her finish. "You begged me at midnight, crying that you'd be homeless." I agreed temporarily. Temporary turned into 24 months. Meanwhile, you've been buying handbags and planning Miami trips with my money. The silence was deafening. Dad's jaw tightened. Brenda looked down, suddenly fascinated by her wine glass. The Porters and Hayes shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "Is this true?" Dad demanded, turning to Vanessa. She stammered. "It's complicated," Audra offered. "I didn't offer," I cut in. "I sacrificed, quietly, for years. And tonight, after being called selfish in front of everyone, I'm done. No more rent. No more midnight emergencies. You have 30 days to figure out your finances like an adult." Dad's face flushed with anger. "You can't just cut her off like that. Where is she supposed to go?" "She could move in with you," I said coldly. "Turn that home gym back into a bedroom. Or she can get roommates. Or work full-time. Those are all options that don't involve me setting myself on fire to keep her warm." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. For once, Dad had no comeback. Vanessa's eyes brimmed with tears, but this time they weren't working. Not on me. I stood, sliding my chair back deliberately. "You wanted to know why I don't enjoy life like Vanessa. Now you know." Enjoy your dessert." The sound of my heels on the hardwood echoed through the silent dining room as I walked out. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying Vanessa's burden or my father's judgment. I was carrying only myself, and that felt like freedom. The drive home from the country club felt unreal, like I was floating outside my own body. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but inside I felt a strange mix of terror and liberation. Years of silence had just shattered in a single dinner, and there was no going back. When I got to my apartment, I barely dropped my purse before my phone exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from Dad, 5 from Vanessa, a text from Mom, who hadn't even been at the dinner. "What happened? Your father is furious. Vanessa's crying. Call me." I poured myself a glass of wine, set my phone face down, and sat in the quiet, my heart pounding. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like someone who had finally roared. But the storm wasn't going to wait. By morning, the voicemails and texts had multiplied. Dad's voice was sharp in every message. "Your behavior last night was inexcusable. You embarrassed this family in front of my friends." Vanessa's text swung like a pendulum, from angry, "How could you humiliate me like that?" to desperate, "Please, I don't know what to do," to manipulative, "I guess you never really cared about me after all." Even Brenda chimed in, "That wasn't the right setting for your outburst, but I had no idea you were carrying this alone. We need to talk." The strangest part? I felt lighter. Their words no longer stuck the way they used to. They bounced off, because the truth was finally out in the open. Still, I needed backup. I called Derek. "I did it," I said as soon as he picked up. "Did what?" I told them, the rent, the 2 years, everything. He was silent for a beat, then said, "How did it go?" "Like a nuclear explosion." "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "It took guts. Come over. I don't want you alone tonight." That evening, curled on his couch with a blanket around me, I replayed every excruciating detail. Derek just listened, holding my hand, nodding at the parts where my voice cracked. "You didn't destroy your family," he said when I finished. "You stopped letting them destroy you." The next day, the real confrontation began. Vanessa showed up at my office. The receptionist called, whispering, "Your sister is here. She's crying in the lobby, saying she won't leave until she sees you." Old me would have rushed down immediately. But new me? I took a deep breath. "Tell her I'm in a meeting. If she doesn't leave, please ask security to escort her out." It felt harsh, but it also felt necessary. For once I wasn't bending. That evening, I called her back. "Vanessa, you can't show up at my workplace and make a scene. That's a boundary." Her voice cracked through the phone. "I can't afford $1, $400 rent. You're gonna make me homeless." "You have 30 days, I said calmly. "Find roommates, move somewhere cheaper, work more hours. Those are all options." "They're not options for me," she wailed. "I need to be in this neighborhood. I can't live with strangers. You don't understand." "No, Vanessa," I said firmly. "I understand perfectly. You don't want to change. But I'm done paying for that choice." Silence. Then the tears turned sharp. "Dad says you've always been jealous, that this is your way of punishing us." I closed my eyes, the words familiar but powerless now. "If Dad thinks I'm punishing you by stopping 2 years of secret financial support, that says more about him than me. I'm done with guilt trips." The line went dead. Later, Dad called, his voice full of cold authority. "We need to discuss this like adults. Cutting her off overnight is vindictive." "I gave her 30 days, I reminded him, "and I've given her 24 months. That's not vindictive, that's generous." "You should have told me," he snapped. "Would you have helped?" I asked. The pause that followed told me everything. "Our circumstances are different," he finally muttered. "Brenda and I have retirement to think about." "So do I shot back. "I'm 32 and haven't been able to save a dime because I've been bankrolling Vanessa's life." "That ends now." His sigh was heavy with disapproval. "You've always been stubborn, Audra. Difficult. This just proves it." But this time, his words didn't sting. They only confirmed what I already knew. In his eyes, I was always the problem when I refused to play the role he assigned me. The fallout spread. My aunt called to say she was disappointed in me. An uncle suggested I was overreacting to a little financial help between sisters. Even Mom, the eternal peacemaker, urged me to find a middle ground. But there was no middle ground left. The line was drawn, and for once I was standing on the side that protected me. It was exhausting. It was lonely. But for the first time in my life, it was honest. And honesty, I realized, was worth every uncomfortable silence. 3 weeks after the country club dinner, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Derek was out of town for work, and I had deliberately kept my family at arm's length. When I opened the door, Vanessa stood there, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, no designer bag, no dramatic makeup. For once, she didn't look like the golden child. She looked human. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than I'd heard in years. Really talk, not fight. I hesitated. Part of me braced for another manipulation, another performance. But something in her eyes looked different, less rehearsed, more raw. I stepped aside. "Come in." We sat at my small dining table, the same one where I'd written countless checks to keep her afloat. She twisted her hands nervously. "I've been horrible to you," she admitted. "I knew what I was doing was wrong, letting you pay my rent month after month. But it was so easy, too easy to just keep letting it happen." Her words hung heavy in the air. I waited for the but, for the plea, the excuse, the inevitable follow-up request. Instead, she said something I never expected. "I found a roommate situation in Ravenswood. 3 girls in a converted loft. My share of rent will be $800. I can afford it if I pick up more hours at work." I blinked, caught off guard. "That sounds reasonable." She nodded quickly. "I also wanted to say I'm sorry, not just for the money, for letting Dad think you were the selfish one all these years when I was the one taking and taking. It was easier to let him see me as the struggling one who needed protection. I knew better, but I let you carry it." For a moment, I didn't trust my own ears. Vanessa, the sister who had perfected the art of tears and excuses, was admitting fault. I studied her face carefully. This time, the tears welling up weren't tactical. They were genuine. "I do love you," I said slowly. "That's never been the question. But our relationship can't survive if it's built on me sacrificing and you taking." She wiped her eyes. "I know. I don't want that anymore. This whole mess, it's been a wake-up call." We talked for nearly 2 hours, circling around years of unspoken resentments and misplaced roles. She confessed that the dependence had become part of her identity, Dad's fragile little girl, the one who needed rescuing. She admitted she sometimes exaggerated her crises because she knew I would always come through. I admitted that my enabling wasn't just about helping her. It was about my fear of conflict, my desperate need for Dad's approval, my belief that if I gave enough, eventually I'd be recognized. When she finally stood to leave, she said, "I'll text you updates about the move. I want you to see I'm actually doing this." And for the first time in years, I believed her. The weeks that followed felt like watching someone take their first shaky steps. Vanessa did move into the loft, smaller and less glamorous than her old place, but hers. She increased her hours at the boutique and even picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop. During one of our new weekly calls, she surprised me by sounding almost proud. "My manager's training me on the inventory system," she said. "If it goes well, there might be an assistant manager position opening up." "That's great," I told her, and I meant it. She laughed. "Turns out, I kinda like having structure. Who knew?" It wasn't a miraculous transformation. She still slipped into old habits, texting me to vent about expenses, hinting at how hard it was. But instead of asking for money, she was asking for advice. That shift, small as it was, felt monumental. Our bond began to change too. For the first time in adulthood, we weren't locked in the roles of rescuer and dependent. We were just sisters. When she invited me over for dinner at the loft, she served pasta from a box and cheap red wine. But the pride in her voice was unmistakable. "I wanted you to see I can do this," she said. I raised my glass to doing it. It was fragile, like balancing on new legs that could wobble at any second, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt that maybe, just maybe, Vanessa and I had a chance at building something healthier than the story we'd been living. By the time Vanessa had settled into her new loft, the initial explosion at the country club had begun to settle into something else, an uneasy new reality. The family roles that had been fixed for decades were shifting, and no one quite knew how to act. Dad avoided me for several weeks, our only communication coming through clipped texts. "We need to talk," Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. I ignored them. For once, I wasn't the one rushing to smooth things over. If he wanted a conversation, he could come to it without the usual accusations. Then one Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was him. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hi, Dad." "Morning," he said, his tone stiff. "I've been thinking about some things, about what you said." I waited, bracing myself. "I may have misunderstood aspects of your arrangement with your sister," he said finally. "While I still don't agree with how you handled it, I recognize I didn't have the full picture." It wasn't an apology, not really. But for my father, a man who had spent years defending Vanessa's every whim, it was seismic. "Thank you for saying that," I replied simply. It was all I could manage without reopening the wound. We started speaking more after that, carefully, like two diplomats testing a ceasefire. He asked about my graduate program, and I noticed, for the first time in years, he actually listened. I didn't kid myself into believing he'd completely changed, but the acknowledgement mattered. Even crumbs felt like a meal when you'd been starved for so long. Mom surprised me even more. For years she had been the family's peacekeeper, soothing bruised egos but never confronting the root problems. After the country club, though, something shifted in her too. Over lunch one afternoon, she sighed and said, "I enabled a lot of the favoritism, Audrey. I thought I was protecting you by teaching you to be independent. But really, I was avoiding hard conversations with your father, and you paid the price." I stared at her, stunned. "Why now? Why are you saying this after all these years?" Her eyes softened. "Because I saw what it led to. You carrying a financial burden in silence, then being labeled selfish on top of it. I can't keep pretending that keeping the peace didn't cost you something." For the first time, I felt like she saw me, not as the strong one who needed nothing, but as a daughter who had been quietly hurting for decades. Vanessa's progress helped too. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying. She called me one night just to ask for advice about a difficult customer at work. Another time, she sent me a photo of her paycheck stub with the caption, "Paid my rent today, all mine." It wasn't much, but it was enough to prove she was walking a new path. Of course, not everyone was so quick to change. Brenda remained firmly in Dad's camp, still chirping about family, helping family at gatherings, though she no longer looked me directly in the eye when she said it. My aunts and uncles mostly avoided the subject, pretending as if the country club dinner had never happened. But the difference was me. I wasn't swallowing my resentment anymore. When someone made a passive-aggressive comment, I didn't flinch. I redirected or shut it down. At Thanksgiving, when Brenda suggested Vanessa deserved extra support because she was finding her way, I calmly said, "Vanessa's finding her way just fine on her own now, and I'm proud of her for that." The table went quiet, but this time the silence didn't terrify me, it freed me. Derek was the one who reminded me how far I'd come. One night as we cooked dinner in my apartment, he said, "You know what's different about you now?" "What?" I asked, chopping vegetables. "You smile more," he said simply, "and it actually reaches your eyes." I paused, letting the words sink in. He was right. For years, my energy had been consumed by carrying everyone else's weight. Now, with those boundaries in place, I finally had space for myself. Rebuilding my family relationships wasn't about forcing them to change overnight. It was about drawing clear lines and sticking to them, even when it made people uncomfortable. When Dad tried to argue that I should still chip in for Vanessa's rent, half maybe, I refused. When Vanessa cried about wanting to move back into a trendier neighborhood, I reminded her gently but firmly that choices come with consequences. When Mom slipped into old habits of asking me to just keep the peace, I told her peace without honesty isn't real. It wasn't easy. But every time I enforced those boundaries, I felt stronger. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible one, or the scapegoat, or the ATM. I was just Audrey, a woman with her own goals, her own voice, and finally, the respect I should have claimed years ago. And while my family wasn't suddenly fixed, it was real. Messy, complicated, but real. And for me, that was enough. 6 months after the country club dinner, I walked into my graduate seminar on digital strategy, carrying not just textbooks, but something much heavier and much lighter at the same time. Heavier because I had endured the emotional weight of tearing apart my family's carefully scripted narrative. Lighter because I had finally set it down and refused to carry it anymore. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living as the responsible sister who silently funded someone else's lifestyle. While being told I was selfish, I was living as Audrey, fully unapologetically Audrey. The changes weren't just financial, though those were powerful enough. With the $1.400 that no longer vanished into my sister's rent, I enrolled in my graduate program and watched my savings account grow for the first time in years. Derek and I even took that postponed trip to Wisconsin, just a quiet weekend by the lake with hiking and homemade dinners, but it felt like freedom. Every step on the trail, every laugh by the campfire, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had given away for too long. I also started working with a financial planner, mapping out a real path toward buying my own condo. Signing those papers one day will mean more than property ownership. It will mean security I built for myself, not borrowed or sacrificed. But the deeper transformation was internal. I learned that speaking your truth might make a room go silent, but in that silence, new growth begins. For years, I thought avoiding conflict was the noble choice, that keeping the peace made me strong. But in reality, silence was just another cage. When I finally spoke out, when I said out loud that I had been paying Vanessa's rent for 2 years, I broke not just their illusion, but mine. The illusion that sacrificing myself made me valuable. The illusion that my father's approval was a prize I needed to earn. In the aftermath, something surprising happened. My relationships, though shaken, became more real. Dad, who had spent decades praising Vanessa's every whim while dismissing my hard work, started to actually listen. His apology was clumsy, half-hearted, but it was the first crack in his armor. And while I no longer depend on his validation, I can acknowledge that small progress matters. Mom, the peacekeeper, admitted she had failed me by avoiding hard conversations. For the first time, she didn't just soothe, she confronted. That honesty allowed me to forgive her. Not because she was perfect, but because she finally saw me. And Vanessa, against all odds, began to change. She picked up extra shifts, found roommates, and started carrying her own rent. More importantly, she started facing herself. Our conversations shifted from crises to real sisterhood. I'll never forget the night she made spaghetti in her tiny loft kitchen and said, "I actually feel better now. When you were paying for everything, I always felt like a failure. Now I know I can do it, even if it's not glamorous." That moment, more than any lecture I could give, showed me that my no had done more for her than years of yes. Of course, not everything transformed into a Hallmark ending. Brenda still drops subtle digs at family dinners, hinting that I should be more supportive. My aunts whispered that I embarrassed my father. My uncle thinks I overreacted. But here's the difference. Their opinions no longer control me. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you choose to open or close. I can love my family without funding their dysfunction. I can show up for dinners, listen, even care. But I can also say no when something crosses my line. And I can live with the silence that follows, because silence doesn't scare me anymore. Looking back, the $1.400 a month was never just about money. It was about identity. It was about playing the role of the selfless sister so well that no one, not even me, noticed the cost. Stopping those payments was about more than financial freedom. It was about reclaiming my life. Now, when I look at Vanessa, I see not just my sister, but a mirror of what happens when enabling replaces love. She's learning to stand on her own feet because I finally stepped back. And I'm learning that real love doesn't mean carrying someone, it means letting them carry themselves, even if they stumble. One evening, months after the fallout, Dad invited us all to dinner again, not at the country club, but at a small Italian restaurant downtown. It wasn't perfect. We still walked on eggshells, but when he asked me about my graduate program and actually listened, something inside me shifted. Baby steps. That's what Derek whispered as we left, squeezing my hand. And he was right. Families don't heal overnight, but they can evolve if you let go of the roles that no longer serve you. Today, my story isn't about being the selfish one or the responsible one. It's about being me. A woman who works hard, loves deeply, and finally understands that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And if there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. True selflessness includes self-respect. Because when I finally stood up and spoke my truth, I discovered something I never expected. I wasn't selfish. I was free. If you've ever felt excluded, overlooked, or underestimated by people who should have embraced you, this story is for you. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever had to choose between being accepted and being yourself? I'd love to hear your story.